Hey, okay. All right, everybody. Welcome to Monday's book readings for Comrade Kwame's book. We're towards the end. Literally, the end is like epilogue, excuse me, and then some appendices. So we're gonna do the epilogue. But with most of the readings that we do here in the Second Rainbow Coalition, we always go over the Statement of Unity, which I will do now. And then after the Statement of Unity, then I'll go ahead and read the book. It's a shorter chapter per se. It's not really even a chapter. It's just an epilogue, but I will go ahead and get started with the Statement of Unity. But first, let me present my screen, because on my screen, I have the Statement of Unity up.
And I can help read too, brother, if you need me to. I have everything here.
Oh, cool. Do you want to do the statement?
Sure.
Let's do it.
Well,
go for it.
Yes. Okay. I'll go ahead and start with the preface.
Okay.
The U.S. was founded as a colonial settler state based upon white supremacy and slavery, stealing the lands of the indigenous nations, breaking every treaty made with them, and confining them to reservations or concentration camps. As the country became more powerful, the eagle sunk its claws into other nations, making war on Mexico and grabbing its northern territory, invading Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines, and either annexing them outright or making them colonies or neo-colonies. And in the 20th century, it became the major imperialist power in the world, exploiting both the people within its boundaries and those in every other country, bullying them with military interventions and robbing them of their right to self-determination. As Huey P. Newton stated, we have two enemies to fight: racism and capitalism. Between the two, capitalism is primary, racism is a byproduct of capitalism. The working people of the world of every ethnicity or nationality face a common enemy that is destroying life on Earth. Our enemy is a small ruling class of property owners controlling most of the world's wealth and resources. We must have our basic needs met to live a good and meaningful life: food, shelter, healthcare, education, freedom from oppression by the state, and peace with other nations. To obtain these essential things for life, we must have the power to see to it that the abundance that is available is shared equitably. And then we move forward to the Statement of Unity for the Second Rainbow Coalition. The legacy of the First Rainbow Coalition dates back to its founding on April 4th, 1969 by the original Black Panther Party, original Young Lords, and Young Patriots organization. A number of other organizations joined this coalition not too long afterwards, such as the American Indian Movement, Brown Berets, Rising Up Angry, the Red Guards, and others. Since the founding of the United States, the masses have developed a number of popular movements that came together to fight against the capitalist imperialist system in various ways around particular demands. Nevertheless, none had established a movement quite like the First Rainbow Coalition. This historic movement was the first of its kind that established a model of class struggle like no other. Its charismatic leader, Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois chapter of the original Black Panther Party, stated that at the end of the day, we weren't engaged in a race struggle. He said that it's a class struggle, goddammit. By uniting with the various oppressed ethnicities and masses, they were able to bridge the gap between the various ethnic communities that white supremacy had long sought to keep divided. This class solidarity equipped them with the material basis and class consciousness to see their common class condition. Therefore, the necessity to form a united front against their common class oppressor, the capitalist imperialist ruling class. The ruling class viewed this as the greatest threat to their class rule and subsequently used the entire repressive forces of the state, such as the police, courts, jails, prisons, and intelligence agencies, etc., in order to crush this emerging revolutionary socialist movement. We refounded the Rainbow Coalition on May 14th of 2021 with the intent of upholding the legacy of the original Rainbow Coalition. We believe that this historic example is the model for the united front that will best serve our class liberation. By upholding the 10-point program of the original Black Panther Party, which was subsequently adopted and later expanded by the original Young Lords, Young Patriots organization, and all other Rainbow Coalition members, we establish our programmatic unity. The 6 disciplinary rules that we uphold ties all organizations in our coalition to a common professional discipline. History has bestowed upon our generation a common class mission to fulfill. The representatives of the capitalist, imperialist ruling class, represented by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, cannot liberate us. It is their class intention and interest to uphold our common class oppression. Therefore, it is only we, the oppressed masses of all ethnicities and nationalities, who must build the necessary class solidarity, class consciousness, organizational structures, and a united front that will ultimately liberate ourselves. This is what the Second Rainbow Coalition is committed to. This is the historic mission we intend to fulfill. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All power to the people, boots on the ground.
All right. Thank you, Hermana. All power to the people. So for those of us that have the book in physical form, because I know sometimes the PDF form is a little different, page 257 is the epilogue. So I'll go ahead and read that, and there'll be things that'll come up that we'll talk about as well too. And before I do, shout out to New Era Young Lords, my carnalito hermano Subitoro for their Young Lord shirt and flag that you see there in the back. Got to show solidarity with like-minded brethren, ¿verdad?
Awesome.
Okay, so the epilogue. The next 5 years of my life were a number of twists and turns. Very few things in life proceed in a linear fashion. I would argue that nothing truly evolves in such a way, especially one's life. The first 3 years, I tried to rebuild my life with my head in the sand, so to speak. I focused primarily on my career, which I understood as Plan B. I needed to establish first so that I could develop Plan A, building a revolutionary movement in this country. I worked odd factory jobs, which eventually took me down the unexpected path of becoming a certified welder and metal fabricator. In the midst of doing that, I jumped from relationship after relationship, trying to find the love of my life. Peaches and I got back together in 2019 for a brief few months, but I quickly realized that she was not the same person I had fallen in love with throughout my teenage years. Life had used and abused her, and her love for me was no longer there. I ended our relationship as quickly as it had begun. It's unfortunate. In September 2019, after getting off probation 6 months prior, I got a call from a comrade in the Revolutionary Communist Party. He wanted me to come up to Chicago to watch a film that Bob Avakian, the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, had recently put out. After watching it, I decided to join their mass-based movement on November 5th, 2019. Since reading a lot of works of Bob Avakian while in prison and coming to accept his leadership, it was a natural course of action for me to take. I stayed with that movement for about 6 months before I realized that that movement was not going to be the vehicle for revolutionary change that I once thought it was going to be. And I'm going to stop right there real quick because like we had mentioned in my previous book reading on Monday, how the CPUSA, the Communist Party of the United States, is now asking people to vote blue, like just because they're afraid of what the right wing fascistas and republicanos are going to be doing. And it's unfortunate, but sometimes I think what happens is movements gain and garner a lot of strength and a lot of momentum. So it's kind of like that little train that could, right? And they go uphill, but every movement, actually almost any relationship, if you can compare a movement to a revolutionary relationship, has their ups and downs. And I think for those of us that are active in the movements that stick around long enough, you see that. And it really speaks to power how people weather that. For instance, head of the partido, the Veronica is, Ernesto, he's been through a lot. If you also know, like, other movements, look at AIM, look at Leonard Peltier, who's still serving time right now for something he didn't do. I mean, that's a
Right.
big downhill slope. It seems like there's up and downs, but if you can just weather those up and downs, it speaks volumes on your character, but it also helps the movement too, no? Like for us as Brown Berets within my particular movement, we have an OG by the name of Carlos Montes, who was one of the many founders of the Brown Beret movement. It was not just David Sanchez.
Right.
And our hermano Carlos Montes, who's actually in Venezuela right now, is very pro-communist, very pro-socialista, and has actually many other orgs, Centro CSO, and I forgot a few others that he had helped found, just like the Berets, and is still active with. And even just a few years ago, even though Yata Senor, this gentleman, we were marching with him at the 50th Chicano moratorium in East LA, and I mean, we had to keep up with him, believe it or not. And so it's all that he went through. He, he was so proud to see all the Berets still active, right? Um, he was so proud to see communism, socialism, Marxism, Leninism, all these very revolutionary isms coming back, because for a long time it was almost looked down upon if you were an activist, and then come to find out you were, pro-socialist or communist or whatever. That's where the
Mm.
term tanky comes from. They would actually slander you with a derogatory term called tanky. Oh, you're a tanky. I guess communists like tanks. I don't even know where that came from, but they would label you that, right? And so, but now it seems like all the movements are realizing that that is the way, so to speak. So it's interesting. And then, you know, it's too bad that he left Peaches, but shout out to Comrade's wife now, who's very active in missing people. Unfortunately, she has a
Yes.
relative that's missing. Um, even in personal relationships, we go through ups and downs. But
Hmm.
that's why I liken the revolutionary relationship to a personal one, because just like with our romantic partners that we will live and die for, a lot of us feel the same way about the movement,
Oh,
being a
absolutely.
brown beret and being a socialista and other things. Like, I'm willing to live and die for that. And so that's why I liken the two, ¿verdad?
Could I add something to that, hermano?
Yeah, of course, please do.
So I was watching a recorded video on YouTube on the partido earlier. I think I had seen it. Somebody had posted it earlier this morning, and it was like 30 minutes. But I've seen, various videos and recordings of the partido, but I saw this one this morning, and it was a good like 30 minutes, and it was by far the one of the most succinct. It was a very short period of time, but it really gave a lot of history with how the partido had started. And when you speak of that momentum, that any movement, it starts when they start to make that traction, and then it starts growing, and before you know it, there's so many people, and you're making all these strides and stuff. Many times I hear people say things, um, with regards to different organizations and different movements, that it died out, you know, and and it saddens me when I hear that. So we just finished reading the Rainbow Coalition Statement of Unity, and emphasized in there that we are trying to uphold the original Rainbow Coalition's mission and vision. It's not that we're starting from scratch, because that would be to discount everything that has been built before us. And it's the same thing when we look at other organizations. I almost see the same thing with the partido. The what happened to La Raza Unida? It died out. No, it never died out, because you know what, we still have a lot of our leaders. I mean, it started here in Crystal City, Texas, and the various leaders that, people that get credit for, and even the ones behind the scenes that don't get as much credit for, are still alive. And that's, if you were to ask them, did the partido die? They would say, no, I'm still alive. I'm still struggling. We're still struggling, as a people. And so I many times we kind of fall into that thinking of something has died down and now we're starting all over. No, we're not. We recognize those that come before us and all the work that they've done, and the struggles that they've gone through, and what we need to learn from that so that we can continue to move forward. So I like that you mentioned that about the momentum, and that it almost seems like another wave, and we're gaining that momentum again, but to never forget, those elders and our ancestors that have come before us.
You know what? Exactly. And that part, exactly. Never forget. Like, you could almost argue that there's also maybe another reason why these revolutionary relationships or movements don't succeed. I mean, look at what happened to Chairman Fred Hampton Sr. I mean, they assassinated him and then lit his house on fire. Look at
Right.
¿Cómo se llamaba el hermano del partido? Ricardo Falcón,
Ricardo
assassinated literally
Falcón.
by white supremacists as on the way back from a partido meeting for La Raza Unida.
Yeah.
So I
Los
forgot the
los
name.
seis de los seis de
Los Seis.
Boulder.
Los Seis
You
de
know.
Boulder. That's exactly right.
Right.
Los
Bomb.
Seis de Boulder. That's exactly. And it's interesting because you could almost every movement that is very politically active that gains like
Hmm.
strength and momentum, like the partido, something always happens, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Crystal City, Texas. I mean, gosh, you look at um old documentaries of just that area alone. I mean, the racism was evident. It's evident now, but I mean, back in the day, they didn't give a damn. They were just in your face about it. And for the partido to make such big movements and strides, I am
Hmm.
100% convinced that a lot of things went down because of the state, just like Chairman
Absolutely.
Fred Hampton Sr., everybody knows. As a matter of fact, even talking to Comrade Elder High Thurman, he was also 100% adamant and convinced that it's because of what Fred Hampton Sr. was doing. He was garnering all the classes and all that and mobilizing people that he was literally assassinated. And so, you know, that's why I say it's almost like a relationship, because just like how we have loved ones, whether it's like a family structure and you have kids and you'll love and die for them, or a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, the movement is very much like that, because it's my opinion. And of course, this is more the militant side of being a Bray, that if you're not willing to die for something, you probably shouldn't be active in it. And at least that's how I feel. I know a lot of the Berets feel the same way too, because we're passionate about it, right? We're passionate about the change. And I know me specifically, um, some of us have gotten to the point where we just don't care anymore. If we have to play the crucible or the expendable, we will. But then you wonder, at what point is the state going to realize we need to stop making martyrs, because that's going to create even more movements.
Yeah. But we also have to be very careful there too, because we we I like to frame it this way. We know that we if we live, if we know what we're living for, we know that we will die doing that, you know but we also have to be prepared as much as possible for that we will face. And we start seeing the momentum that is happening, and the contradictions are heightened to a certain point. That's why that conversation that we were having earlier is that shit will hit the fan sooner than we think. I think, in my that's just my own personal opinion. uh I don't think it'll be too long. I really don't. Now, we say this all the time, we won't live to see certain things. We may not live to see the revolution, or socialism come into play, or communism, or what have you. That we won't see the end of what it is that we're trying to get to. But I feel like any one of us here who's still alive and breathing could be here when the shit hits the fan. I really do. I feel that way.
And and a lot of us do these things for our kids, so that if we don't see it in our lifetimes, at least hopefully they will, or at least some kind of like impact or whatever. Like I remember for years saying, "Gosh, I hate cops. I don't like cops. I hate them." But I never thought for once that there would be that whole movement of abolish the police, defund the police, and now because it's
Right.
evident with police brutality, especially with our black brothers and sisters, that movement has garnered strength. Um, Almost every major metropolitan area or city
Mhm.
has
Mhm.
some kind of movement based specifically on defunding or abolishing the police. And in my lifetime, I never thought that would come to fruition, but I'm kind of glad it did. And so I'm hopeful that, by the time my children come up who are black and brown, that they will see some kind of effects. Like I remember seeing an Amazon mini series. Gosh, was it like it wasn't the Avengers, it's like some weird superhero, The Watchmen. And I remember the first like two episodes. This is supposed to be in the future, right? There was a policeman that was pulling somebody over, and he wasn't, too sure about this individual, and so he went back to his vehicle. And he actually had a radio in to release his firearm because they
Mm.
had so many issues of police just, killing people, that they were limiting that. And I remember thinking, damn, if we could ever get to that, hell, if we
Mm.
could even get to the point where they don't have anything, like if we could even step that up and not even have them, that would be great. But just to see that in this like major bougie Hollywood franchise, I was like, damn, I don't even think that would have made it to the silver screen had it not been for the grassroots movements of defund the police, abolish the police, right?
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and continue. We're on page 257, the epilogue, and barely second paragraph because we got good stuff to talk about. So it says in September of 2019, after getting off probation 6 months prior, I got a call from a Conrad and the Revolutionary Communist Party. He wanted me to come up to Chicago to watch a film that Bob Avakian, the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, had recently put out. After watching it, I decided to join their mass-based movement on November 5th, 2019. Since reading a lot of the works of Bob Avakian while in prison and coming to accept his leadership, it was a natural course for me to take. I stayed with that movement for about 6 months before I realized that movement was not going to be the vehicle for revolutionary change that I once thought it was going to be, and that's what sparked our conversation. From there, I started to build relationships with families across the country who had family members murdered by the pigs, by the police. Some of those families were well known while others weren't and rarely received media attention. It was there that I learned a lot about police terror and how most of those families never received justice, no matter the circumstances surrounding their loved ones' deaths. Every year, at least 1,000 people are murdered by the police, while less than 1% of those pigs are ever charged and convicted of anything. This was the quote unquote normal way the system truly worked. I initially believed organizing around that issue and those families was the way to build a revolutionary movement in this country. But in time, I realized that the divisions between the families of murder victims were immense, and that ultimately I would have to join a revolutionary party if I wanted to help build a revolutionary movement. The opportunity came when I was contacted by Chairman Shaka Zulu of the New African Black Panther Party. After speaking to him, he offered to give me a leading position in the party. On March 20th, 2020, I accepted his offer and joined the party as their deputy chairman. A few months later, I was promoted to Minister of Culture for the New African Black Panther Party on June 5th of that same year. See Appendix number 3, and it refers to that. Not too long after that, I met Katrina Overstreet. Her sister, Siha Taylor, I apologize, comrade, if I screwed that up, had been missing since February 6th of 2020. She wanted the help of the New African Black Panther Party. I hadn't expected for us to become a couple from this, but we ended up falling in love and getting married at the courthouse in Bartow. I wonder if that's supposed to be Barstow, in Bartow, Florida, September 9th, 2020. And I say that only because there's a Barstow, California. Her presence in my life came as a big relief. Not only had I just about given up on love and had been dealing with the recent passing of my stepfather, aka Mr. Hayes, but I was being targeted by the agent provocateurs that had infiltrated the New African Black Panther Party, And at the time, and her support was stabilizing for me. Again, we were just talking about movements doing this, and here we go. Here's that downward spiral, right?
Right.
I was trying to warn the other Central Committee leaders at the time, but my warnings were largely ignored. So I resigned from the New African Black Panther Party in August of 2020 in protest. And by the beginning of 2021, those ominous warnings came true. Those who were disrupting and sabotaging the party from the inside led an attempted coup against the New African Black Party Panther Party's membership and leadership to establish a separate party. I came back to the New African Black Panther Party on February 2nd, 2021, and resumed my position as the Minister of Culture. I released a recorded tape conversation that I had with the wife of the former Minister of Defense, Kevin Rashid Johnson, who was behind the attempted coup to support Chairman Shaka Zulu and the General Secretary, Tom Watts. I knew the allegations against the leaders were not true and that the Minister of Defense's wife, Shupavu, was forthright in stating such in that conversation. It was due to the fact that she sided with her husband during that coup that I felt the truth should be put out there so that the comrades stuck in the middle could decide what was fact on the right side of history. Again, man, see, again, ups and downs, right? With all the agent provocateurship that the faction was behind during closed doors while trying to discredit the remaining leaders of the Central Committee, I knew I could bring what was going on in the dark to light. I was subsequently attacked and slandered by the former Minister of Defense, Chairman Shaka Zulu, and General Secretary Tom Watts as well. So I chose not to get sucked into an endless back and forth between us and them. They had wasted enough of our time. We had to rebuild what they had destroyed. We knew our social practice would speak for us, while the former Minister of Defense's wife on that taped conversation would certainly put things in perspective for those who were wrestling with the confusion that came from that split. And you can see a YouTube channel, Kwame Shakur, on the conversation between Shapavu and I, October of 2020. And then there's even a link there for those of us that have the book. A
Talk
year
about
later,
talk
oh, go ahead,
about
sis.
uh stating your sources, and he didn't put his own recording on there.
That's right. And it sucks I have to
Yeah.
do that because, in terms of up and down movements, I often think through colonization and like this weird new form of COINTELPRO that, I almost wonder if the state has to do as much damage to us because sometimes there's infighting within movements or disagreements or whatever. It's funny as I gotten older now, especially with dealing with other comrades and protests and marches and stuff like that. I am extremely cautious of how I present myself, especially like in a march or a protest or whatever. We can agree to disagree. I may even get spit in the face. But if it's a black, brown, or indigenous brother or sister, or even a white ally or whatever, I'm going to handle that on the sidelines because I know there might be cameras rolling, people are documenting and so forth. Because it's sad to say, but if you look at a lot of infiltrators, provocateurs, and informants, they're within your own ranks. William O'Neill, he was a Black Panther prospect, right? He's the one that informed everything about Chairman Fred Hampton Sr., and that's ultimately what got him murdered, if you think about it. I know here in Portland with the Black Lives Matter movements, there was actually a point in time where um, a lot of anti-fascist comrades, the Panthers and us were like, we're not going to any more BLM marches or protests because we would actually see people that we did not recognize that would incite violence or would damage like federal buildings or whatever. And we're like, man, we got to march past that. Like, why are you doing that? And then come to find out, there's even articles about it that there were comrades that were paid to infiltrate the Black Lives Matter movement and to incite different things so that protesters or people that wanted to stand in solidarity with us would fall into charges. And so it's again in to make my point on the up and downs of evolutionary relationships, just like if you are married, even if you're gay or straight, or if you're dating or whatever, you have to be cautious, right, of how you deal and interact with the opposite sex out of respect for your partner, right? And it's interesting, but for those of us that love the movement so much that will die for that, I almost feel the same way. I mean, if you look at all the flags that I have in solidarity and being part of the Rainbow Coalition, I love all my other coalition members, and I do view them as brothers and sisters because I am now understanding of the class movement and struggle. But that doesn't mean that we're always going to see eye to eye on certain things, right? We are a revolutionary family, but just like a family, I may do or say something that might offend somebody else, or they may do or say something that might offend me. And so I feel like how we resolve that really speaks on our character, right? Because we already know there's probably people that are watching us both on the inside and on the outside. And when I say the outside, the state, right? And so, again, just weathering through these up and downs, I almost want to be like Fidel Castro. Brother Ralphie was educating us, and I think, gosh, correct me if I'm wrong, Ralphie, wasn't it like 600 or 700 times or something like that the CIA had to try to get him assassinated, and they never could. He survived every single one of them, and I think it's because he was cognizant. He was always trying to
Mm.
be the better leader and be open and transparent, and the people loved him. And so when you have the love of the community, they're going to have your back. I mean, that has to be why he survived 600 or 700
Yeah,
times.
it's the declassified papers themselves admit to the hundreds of times, and there's a museum called the Museum of, I think, Genocide or something like that, in of terrorism in Cuba, where they have actual documents from the CIA in their own words talking about all the operations against them. They use his family, his close ones. They try to go use his friends. They used everything and everybody. But yeah, the people loved him
Mm.
because they couldn't kill him.
I think that's great that that was in the museum to terrorism. United States documents there,
That's
because
exactly how it's presented, because people don't know the US, after Fidel Castro had things going, they attempted to assassinate him and Che, and they killed people in the dock. And the plan was kill them, they'll come running, and then a second bomb explodes and kills them. Well, something went wrong, and they ended up killing children. It was the CIA and US funds that did that. So people don't know about all the terrorism US has caused around the world until they see it from the other side and actually see in their own words, the terrorism that the US has, declassified, or maybe somebody has uncovered.
man, that's interesting.
Mm.
Talking to some of my family that are Venezolanos, I was shown this tape, and it was interesting. I forgot how we were talking about it. We were just talking about weird things that the American government does or whatever, and they showed me a tape. If y'all remember Hugo Chavez, when he passed away, he developed this like a weird form of cancer. It was very aggressive, and like within weeks to months that he was expected to live, like he died like really quickly. It was rather aggressive after they diagnosed him, right? And I remember, gosh, who's the president now? Maduro or somebody like that, made a statement. And in the statement, he says, if we ever find out that the US government was behind his death in some way, shape, or form, that would be an immediate act of aggression, and we will actually declare war. And I remember seeing, whoa, holy shit, I've never seen that uh, in any American media or whatever. And so the Venezolanos have an app, right, that they see all their news and stuff from. So I remember seeing it on the app, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I remember talking to my wife about it, and I was like, huh, you know, I've heard of this weird heart attack gun that didn't shoot bullets, it shot waves. And I was in the 70s that was supposed to like induce some kind of like heart attack, right? Um, and I don't know if that ever came to fruition. And I was like, I wonder, did they develop like something that you could drink out of, or a pill, or drops that they put that would like develop an aggressive form of cancer? And I remember my wife saying, "Well, yeah." She said, "Yeah, why wouldn't they? Like, we're number one in any nation in the world to have the largest military budget, and that's for black ops, regular, whatever. So why wouldn't we do that?" And when she put it to me in those terms, I remember thinking, "Yeah, I wonder if they had something to do with that." Like, again, it's interesting to talk to people from there because they even said, had it not been for the creator putting oil, which they call petro, natural in the jungles, like literally you can with a machete hack into the jungle and it starts seeping out of the ground, communism or socialism would thrive. Because what I didn't realize is Venezuela and OPEC standards is like either the second or third largest OPEC producing petroleum producing, crude oil producing nation in the world. Of course, number one is some place in the Middle East, but I did not realize that about South America and that part of South America specifically. And so it always makes me wonder, had it not been for that, would it be thriving? Because it really isn't now, but there's always reasons why. Like a lot of us think that the reason why, and it's still happening today, the illegal Cuban blockade and all that is because they're just so close to Florida. It's only what 50 or 60 miles from the furthest southern point of the Keys to Cuba. Like that's not a whole lot. That's not a whole lot of miles, right? I think people swim the English Channel back and forth, and it's wider than that. It's more further than that. So, you know, it almost makes me wonder. And then we look at history, look at what the indigenous nations went through. And that's here on this land. This land is stolen land. And we erased those nations. So it always makes me wonder, like if America, if the United States, which I call the United States, would just leave people the hell alone to figure out their own economies, their own forms of government, if things would not prosper. That's my opinion. I really do believe that. Reading off some comments, Comrade Zombie has some really wise words in terms of like how we deal with each other and so forth. And don't air your dirty laundry in public. Groups should stay in private and so forth. Groups should stay in private and so forth. And I wholeheartedly agree because everybody's watching. Everybody's watching. Okay, bottom of the paragraph of page 258. A year later, we got tangible proof that the FBI had infiltrated our party November 3rd, 2021. The San Francisco Bayview put out an article titled, "What was the Bayview infiltrated by a quote unquote rock star informant?" Was the Bayview infiltrated by a rock star informant? That's when the remaining party members learned that Malik Washington had been working for the FBI for the past 10 years. Again, William O'Neill, they always come from the inside, right? When the split occurred between the new African Black Panther Party, Malik Washington took the side of Rashid's faction and even used the San Francisco Bayview to slander and denounce our party by allowing Rashid alone to write against our party. Until the day that he was exposed by the Bayview, he had continued to fight for the release of Kevin Rashad Johnson from prison. This begs the question, why would the FBI allow their quote unquote rock star informant unconditionally support Rashid and his revolutionary intercommunal Black Panther Party while consistently attacking the new African Black Panther Party? Why would he do that? Our central committee put out a statement about Malik Washington's involvement with our party for the past 10 years while asking the same question. And then he even has a document in his appendixes here. That's another nice thing I like about Comrade is not only does he write about his experiences, not only does it bring up good confrontations, there's fucking proof and it's here in black and white. Excuse my language, like literally. After getting bogged down in a back and forth with who's tried to wreck the party, we regrouped and began to rebuild. May 14, 2021, we refounded the Rainbow Coalition, which we renamed the Second Rainbow Coalition. The last time that happened was April 4th, 1969, when Chairman Fred Hampton brought the original Young Lords and Young Patriots together. Later, a number of other organizations, such as AIM, the American Indian Movement, Brown Berets, Rising Up Angry, and others joined the original Rainbow Coalition. And then he states here the Statement of Unity. Not too long after our refounding of the Second Rainbow Coalition, I was contacted by Andy Willis, a comrade of Hy Thurman, the co-founder of the Young Patriots organization. They had heard about the Second Rainbow Coalition that we refounded and wanted to contribute. From that discussion, we formed a council of elders of the Second Rainbow Coalition, individuals who had played a part in the 60s and 70s, who were still boots on the ground. And those elders, that's one of the reasons why, out of respect, I call Comrade Hy Thurman Comrade Elder, is I feel like with people that have been in revolutionary movements, like for us as Brown Berets, Carlos Montes, people in the Partido like Ernesto and other chairmans and so forth, like other movements like Andy Willis, his lovely wife Leslie, and so forth, that we should really listen because there's a saying, history doesn't change often, but people do, and their attitudes and what they do and so forth. And so there's always been infiltration, right? In any movements, and the new African Black Panther Party just had experienced that, right? And so I really like talking to a lot of the elder comrades, the comrade elders, as I call them, because it's not always just in terms of like infiltrators, informants, agitators, and so forth, but also ideas like, hey, we want to march, we want to protest, we want to do an action. What do y'all think about this? I always find that they always bring something to light that we never really considered because they've been doing it. Maybe they've done that 30 years ago or whatever, and this was the outcome. We have a hermano in the Southeast that has brown berets. Shout out to my brother Willie Rodriguez. And he had posted this video of the Austin Brown Berets in a police brutality action, I believe was in 70 or 72. And I mean, even though it's in black and white, I mean, they were literally just beating the hell out of people. And I remember just maybe last week or a week before, somebody in Seattle was asking about security protection for a anti-brutality police brutality march. And so I remember thinking, my God, in the 70s they were going through that. And now here we are going through it again too. It'd be interesting to talk to people who have been doing this and think of different tactics and so forth, right? And then with time, we don't know how long we're going to have these comrades, especially the comrade elders. It'd be nice to sit down and talk to them, get to know them better, and just share tactics, share information, share the history, because there's always a repeated pattern of oppression by the state and it doesn't change. It may morph, but I'm a firm believer COINTELPRO never left. I mean, that's what brought William O'Neill into the original Black Panther Party. Look at this Malik Washington, right? So it probably just changed and morphed. And so what we can do to better ourselves and our movements at the behest of what elders and their wisdom have, for me, that's just priceless. Continuing, it says, sometimes when I think upon the time in prison, when I first read the speech, Power Anywhere There's People by Fred Hampton, and how he inspired me, I think about how far I've come in my revolutionary journey. As surreal as my life has been, I know this book is still being written. Only time and social practice will determine how it will ultimately end. I'm of the mind frame that we will prevail and the other generation will have to suffer capitalist imperialistic oppression and enslavement again. But it will take the power of the people transformed into a material force to achieve this, not only within the belly of the beast, the United Snakes, but also the whole world. I'm lucky to have found a revolutionary partner in my wife to embark on this revolutionary journey with me. I'm gonna stop right there real quick because I love the quote that the Cubans have that says, "Sin mujer no hay revolución." So that basically is, without a woman, there is no revolution. And I think for people that like myself and like Comrade Kwame that have revolutionary parties, I think it speaks highly of them because I know for me, I probably couldn't be where I'm at if it wasn't for my party, for my wife, for my person. Some of the Braves met her in Denver, and anytime I need to do something, anytime there's like an action or a movement or whatever, she's my backup. I mean, she introduced me to burner phones, tactics, and so forth. Anytime I have to move across the country, believe it or not, here in the United States, whether it's an open carry state, closed carry state, concealed license state, or whatever, through her, I found out that you can travel with a firearm. There's ways to go through TSA, literally with a pistol, and you just claim it, and then you go and pick it up at the other airport. And so anywhere I go, I'm able to bring my firearm and so forth. And I remember just being educated by that through her. So like, I really believe in revolutionary relationships, and it really touches my heart when I see revolutionary couples, whether they're same sex, different sex, or whatever, because to me, that's not just one powerful warrior, that's two, right? And then even more so if you have little ones or you adopt or so forth, right? There's no higher meaning in life than that. We all contain circles of meaning inside larger circles of meaning. Being able to find a lifetime partner who is just as dedicated to a revolutionary struggle as I am are two most important, meaningful, concentric circles, which gives my life its most highest meanings. In other words, to borrow a phrase from Viktor E. Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, they are my will to meanings. They are the two most important reasons why I look forward to waking up every day. Amen, brother. It's the reason why I breathe, actually. The most important thing I want people to take away from this book as a significance of the prison liberation movement and the new African Black Panther Party, we have a two-pronged strategy. Number one, transform the razor wire plantations into schools of liberations. And number two, transform the oppressed communities into base areas of cultural, social, and political revolution in the context of building a worldwide united front against capitalist imperialism, racism, and repression. My life and Chairman Shaka Zulu's life is a testament to this first prong. The United States represents 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. This isn't by coincidence, this is by design. This has been a counterinsurgency tool of the repressive arm of the state since the end of the Civil War. It became one of the ones with that conscious objective since the implementation of the quote unquote war on drugs. We must transform this into its opposite by transferring and transforming our brothers and sisters into revolutionaries who leave prisons as committed Black Panther revolutionaries and not sociopaths continually being a destructive force within our community. If there's anything one should take away from this book is that some of our most dedicated cadre leaders will one day emerge from these quote unquote razor wire plantations and join this revolution. Signed, Kwame Shakur, Minister of Culture for the New African Black Panther Party, November 27th, 2021. And that ends the epilogue. One thing that really resounded with me towards the end here, a lot of us 70s and 80s kids remember the war on drugs and remember the whole DARE program. I even forgot what it meant. It was DARE. And anyways, McGruff, the fight crying dog, and all this other crap that they fed us in school and so forth. And, you know, we now know that the CIA has planted, admittedly, drugs in Black and brown communities and so forth. And it's interesting to me that just talking to some family members that I've now contacted with that have left socialist countries, I remember asking them, specifically in Venezuela, the currency is called the Bolivar. I think it's like 20 or 30 Bolivares for every dollar. And I remember asking them, I said, well, you know, the research I've done, and it's weird because y'all are socialists, but the American dollar is now taking over. And how does that impact the economy? And the thing I love about South American socialists is they are very forward and they are well educated. I believe it was Cuba that had the lowest literacy rate and now has the highest, right? Like Brother Ralphie always tells us, they know about our movements, right? And that's obviously through the use of books. And it's interesting in talking to the Venezolanos how they are saying that what has happened in Mexico with the narco cultura culture and so forth is coming to Venezuela. Right, wrong, or indifferent, what that's doing is it's bringing in the American dollar. So now what happens is the Bolivar is depreciating, even though the country and the United States are at each other's throats, and I would actually blame the US for that. The American dollar is taking precedence. And come to find out, this is through the use of drugs that are coming in from Colombia, Mexico, and so forth to Venezuela and then being exported. If you understand geography, Venezuela is a coastal nation with many different states. And then it goes into Miami and so forth, right? And I remember thinking, man, but I know a lot of like socialists and communists, they're very staunch and very anti drugs, certain drugs, especially some that are detrimental to their own people. Like, how can that be? And I remember some of the family members saying, well, if they couldn't get our petrol, which is the crude oil, they could get us through the economy. And how did they get us through the economy? By devaluating the currency. And how do they devaluate the currency? By bringing in the American dollar. But how do they do that? How do they bring in the American dollar? Well, you know, the neighbor to the north is Colombia, right? And so it just makes me wonder if we now know what we all suspected along, that the CIA was in charge of, and one of the root planners of bringing crack into Black and brown communities in the 70s and 80s, if they're not trying to do that in Venezuela now to depreciate the Bolivar and to break them down economically. If you know your history and what we did to Libya, we try to do that first, right? Gaddafi was trying to change things up, and the American dollar there was depreciating. And then when we couldn't do that, what's the next thing we did? We took him out, literally assassinated him, right? Through, I believe, Clinton, if it wasn't through Barack Obama at that time, and that was with a Democratic president. So it just seems to me like there's a pattern, there's a historical pattern there, and there's other nations like Portugal has literally legalized almost everything and taxed the hell out of it, and so with all this extra tax money, they put it back into infrastructure through like free medical and free social service programs, right? I think in Switzerland or something like Netherlands or something like that has always done that. Like literally, you can go into a bar, smoke hashish or whatever, and then they are taxed, and then that money goes back to infiltrate the people. And it's interesting if you look at it through a mental health perspective and through a criminology perspective. They don't have a whole lot of prisons and prisoners that are based off of high drug usage or drug related crimes, right? And then they don't really have a whole lot of suicide rates. They don't have a whole lot of, and it just makes me wonder why. Is there any kind of relation? But anyways, that is the end of the epilogue. It was kind of short. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns, or did anything in the epilogue that we read resonate with y'all? Anytime I hear the war on drugs, that the whole DARE program and all that, it really hits home to me, being a half Chicano, half Venezolano, being born and raised in El Paso, Texas, right there on the frontera, because me personally, crossing to see family in Colonia Lincoln and Ciudad Juarez, I remember Juarez has always been a safe, wonderful place. And then in the 80s and 90s, when crack was evident and then the narco cultura came in, I mean, you couldn't pay me to go into Juarez now, but now we know that there's reasons why, right? But that's it. That is the end of the epilogue. Does anybody have anything that they would like to add or to say? Go ahead, Comrade Zombie.
So what resonates with me, and you and I have had conversations about this, is the possibility of COINTELPRO. And as groups get stronger, of course, that becomes more and more of an issue, more of a risk. There was recently a article that was put out on The Intercept. And I think it came out at the beginning of February, where a reporter, a social justice reporter, did a bunch of digging and filled out a bunch of public access, requests for information and stuff, and it confirmed what a lot of people knew all along, that the FBI had put a mole, a infiltrator into the Black Lives Matter movement in Denver around the time of the George Floyd incident. And he was in the group for a long time. So, everybody was like, oh yeah, COINTELPRO went away. They did away with it. No bullshit. And I just think that we have to, like you said, you have to decide how much risk you are willing to take upon yourself for this movement, because it is going to happen. Groups are going to be infiltrated. There's going to be incidents that occur, because just like in the 1960s, I don't think there's anybody in this country who has any knowledge of the Black Panther Party and the Rainbow Coalition in the 1960s who could even dare to deny that the United States government wasn't involved in what happened to Fred Hampton, because they realized how powerful they were becoming, and how if more people started to follow along in their footsteps and continue to develop these dual systems, outside of government control, how badly that was going to go for the capitalist government. So I don't think there's anybody who can deny that they were involved in that. And I don't think that their watchfulness of, let's see, unfriendlies, if you want to put it that way. I don't know how else to put it. Their watchfulness of groups that do not support the United States government has never ended. And I just think we need to keep that in mind.
100%, 100%, 100%. I think I would almost add to that you would be foolish if you think that ever ended or that they're not watching.
Right. You know, I mean, the United States government and the capitalists that run this country are always going to do what is best for themselves, not what is best for the people. That's why, you know, like Fred Hampton said, not only is this a race war, and it's more so a class war than it is a race war. You know, it is the 2% against the 98%. And that 2% is going to do whatever they have to do to continue to maintain that 2% status.
100%, 100%. Because we're a threat. We're a threat to them. We're a threat to the establishment. If it was just Panthers, if it was just Berets, if it was just anti-fascist comrades, Aimsters, they would have eliminated us a long time ago. But when we come together, there's strength in numbers. And when
Yes.
people understand this class struggle, that transcends racial barriers. Because, and I've had this conversation with other Berets. I have more in common with a poor white person, working class person, than I do with a rich Chicano that lost where they came from.
Absolutely. You know, and I mean, we see it. We're small potatoes. I mean, the United States government has a history of interference in other countries' governments. You know, do you think they're not going to interfere with us?
Right.
You know,
Right.
I mean, we're small potatoes compared to some of the things that they've done. You know, Venezuela is a perfect example.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's CIA documents that show that the government approved of funding and helping with a coup attempt against Chavez.
That's exactly
You
right.
know, and we have done that over and over and over throughout history to make sure that we maintain governments that are favorable to the US interests in all of these different countries. If they're willing to go to that extreme, do you think that they're not willing to infiltrate groups and get rid of a few who they consider to be, quote, nobodies? You know?
Exactly. Yep.
You know?
Exactly. You have a very, very valid point. I think if we have at least that knowledge, or we at least acknowledge that, and we are on our P's and Q's, we'll be successful. I think the key to unsuccessful things is to not acknowledge that. Like, you have to understand that COINTELPRO never ended. It just transformed. You know, when I look at, gosh, what was that Batman movie with? It was a Batman movie with like Christian Bale, Morgan Freeman, and remember they had the God's Eye that was like this computer program that can link every cell phone and use your camera, whether it was on and off, and it could like triangulate anybody's position just by through the use of cell phone. And I remember thinking, yeah, this is Hollywood, but what's to say that ain't around? Like, that is
Right.
COINTELPRO, especially
Right.
with technology nowadays and Black Ops budgets. Like, there's probably crap out there that we don't know about.
Right. Well, and the powers that be in this country are not unaware of the growing sentiment in this country against police brutality, against the oppression of police departments. They are not unaware of the growing sentiment against capitalism. You know, they are very aware of it. And you can bet your right damn arm that they are already watching a lot of these more powerful groups, because they know that the people that are becoming dissatisfied in this country, the working class people that are becoming dissatisfied, are looking for someone to lead them. You know, I see it all the time on TikTok. I mean, Rainbow Coalition could explode with members if we had a way to contact all these people on TikTok, because I see it all the time in comments, like of anti-fascist videos and people making comments in lives, you know, about, you know, oh my God, I wish the Black Panthers were still around. Somebody should restart the Rainbow Coalition. And I'm sitting in my living room going, we have, you know, we
You know
have,
what?
we
You're
got to
right.
tell them about it. We have.
You're right. You're right. I mean, Ralphie can attest, like whenever we show up in uniform or whenever there's other orgs like the Panthers or whatever, I want to say at least once or twice out of any action, march, protest, anything that we
Mhm.
did, forms of civil disobedience, whatever, there's always at least a comment or two. Oh, we never knew you guys were still
Yeah.
around. Like we've never left.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing is just this whole like disinformation campaign.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not having to worry about agent provocateurs and agitators, it's disinformation as
Right.
well too. You know,
Right.
there was admittedly a point in time where, berets or whatever had a separatist movement of nothing but women, mujeres, and they were called las
Mm-hmm.
adelitas because they were done. They were like, no, 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 we're not like secretaries. No, 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 we are
Yeah,
warriors and
we're over
champions.
it.
We're over it. But let me
Right.
tell you, at the same time, some of the beret women that I roll with now, there's no way in hell that would ever happen. As a matter of fact, we have leaders now. Shout out to Yola Makes Cold Weather. They're out of Chicago area, who is a brown beret leader. So like if there's
Mm-hmm.
not disinformation, then they like get snippets of history and it retains. And that is
Yes.
a dark side of the Bray history where there was that separatist movement because it was necessary because
Right.
we as men were being pig-headed. But I can tell you
No.
now that the men that I roll with now are very secure in their sexuality. They're
Yeah.
okay with, taking up arms with the ladies and not marching with them. And not only that, but I would actually counter argue that and say that some of the mujeres in the movement now are the fiercest of warriors that I have ever met.
Oh
And
yeah.
so see, that's what I'm saying is like I've even been in places with women berets that are in uniform and they're like, oh my gosh, and the women are involved too. Like, yes,
Oh yeah.
it's never
Yeah.
left or whatever you thought,
Right.
like it didn't just stay the same. Like
Right.
we're not just separatists of the ladies, we are with them, they are with us, we
Yep.
are one.
Yeah.
But
Well, I
it's
think that's
disinformation.
why and I think that's why that as a coalition, one of our biggest one of our biggest goals needs to be to combat that misinformation,
Yeah,
you know,
100%.
because like I'm constantly, you know, I'm honored that I'm pretty much surrounded by socialists and commies all the time, you know, and you know, we will get into lives on TikTok and there's all these, oh, fucking commies, just leave the country. If you don't like it here, go someplace else. And these people are still operating from a place of red scare misinformation.
Yeah, McCarthyism.
And right. And when we really boil it down and pointedly ask them, what's communism? What's socialism? How does it work? They don't know.
Right.
They are scared of that ism. We call it the ism boogeyman. You know,
Right.
they're scared of it. And I think one of the biggest things that we need to be able to do is combat that misinformation, you know, through our actions, you know, the way we carry ourselves and our actions at different street happenings. Let me put it that way. Street occurrences. And maybe even starting to go out in the communities and teaching, you know, like having these kind of book clubs, but have them more open, where people can hear level-headed, you know, educated people that are educated on these subjects, you know, like Rafa can talk about the history of what's happened in Cuba and give real information, not misinformation. You know,
Yeah.
you can talk about Venezuela because you have family there. And, you know, we have people in our group who can talk from an indigenous point of view because they are indigenous. You know, they are Native Americans and or Native North Americans. Some of them are in Canada.
Right. Right.
But I think we really, that's going to be the turning point when we can finally get to a point where we can overcome all of those decades of misinformation. That's going to be the turning point.
I think you're 100% right, and I think you have a very valid argument and point. You know, it's interesting because, gosh, I think this was just yesterday or day before, or I had a mess up meeting with Ralphie, and I forget when that was. It was just recent, but I remember after the meeting, I was having dinner with my wife, and I remember we were talking, and it was funny. We were teasing each other, but kind of fantasizing. And she was like, you know how there's like different religious sects like Mormons or Jehovah Witness that go knocking on people's doors or whatever. And I go,
Mhm.
yeah. And she goes, well, imagine if there were a bunch of tankies. You know, that's the derogatory
Right.
term people use for a
Right.
socialist or communist that did that door to door and just had like the little red book or whatever. You know, have you really thought about a change of political organization, revolution? And then I was teasing her and I was like, nah, man, people would get shot. And she was like, well,
Right.
maybe in bigger cities, if it gained momentum, like, you know, Nueva York, Miami,
Yeah.
Seattle. And then once it was like a known thing, just like everybody knows that
Yeah.
Jehovah Witness will come every now and then we could
Right.
start infiltrating other parts of the country. And I was like, you know what? That's actually a pretty good damn idea
Really
because,
not right. Right.
yeah, because honestly,
Really not a
that's
bad idea there, Mrs.
right.
Lobo.
Because that's how I actually got educated. I
Yeah.
know a lot of the historical aspects to warfare and political organizing and intergovernmental communal practices that the
Mm-hmm.
northern and southern indigenous nations had. Like I'm a nerd when it comes to like if you robbed a chicken back in the day, how did they, you know, discipline you in the Aztec
Mm-hmm.
Empire or whatever? And I would actually read up on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was actually educated by a comrade that was a staunch communist. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
very staunch. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember in a political science class one time, they had transparencies, the little plastic transparencies that you would use
Yeah.
for like
Yeah.
an overhead projector.
Damn, you
And
just aged yourself,
I
Lobo.
sure did. I sure did. I sure did. And they actually had like different things like the Communist Manifesto and like bullet points, like this is what they stand for,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Different things on like the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, or
Mm-hmm.
or the United States as a whole, right? Like I forgot the Constitution, the Civil Rights Act, and so forth. Like different political and communal systems of government people
Mm-hmm.
had different transparencies for. And I remember I had built one off of like pre-Columbian Mesoamerican ideology, right? What the Apaches would do when an elder
Mm-hmm.
was no longer able to care for themselves, right? What the Guajira or Guayuu of Venezuela, what they would do in terms of warfare, like different things, right? And that was my transparency. And I'll never forget, I was curious and I was laying them against other transparencies and noticing that there was a lot of likenesses. Some were very contradictory. The one that had a lot of likeness that was literally almost verbatim the different things that I wrote was communism, socialism. And that's when I started to come to realize that certain people had been doing that, like you and I had previously talked about. Certain people
Right.
had been doing that. It just
Right.
wasn't called
Right.
socialism or communism. But they
Right.
were in
Just didn't have
theory
a
and
name.
historical practice, right? They were doing that. It just didn't have a name.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the ways that we can also educate some of our indigenous brethren is
Yes.
just because it has a name, whether it's, originated in Europe or whatever, that ism, guess what?
Yep.
You've been doing that.
Right.
So why don't you
Right.
take credit and partake with us?
Well, and a lot of my indigenous acquaintances, they know that. And when we're in our little commie circle lives on TikTok, they will literally, when someone says, well, there's never been a successful communist country, they'll say, well, that's true, because the majority of the time there's been an authoritarian figure who didn't want to give up power, or the United States has interfered, because the
Mhm.
United States cannot, absolutely cannot let there be a successful communist or socialist country, because if there is a successful communist or purely socialist country, that's gonna make people in this country ask even more questions.
Yes,
So they
exactly right.
cannot allow it to happen. So that's why they go in and interfere with all of these governments. But my indigenous friends will tell these people, this is how we lived. This is how our indigenous ancestors lived. They had no state, they had no government, and they had no currency.
Right.
That's communism. They
Right.
just didn't know what it was called. Everybody contributed what they could, and everyone's needs were met. That's communism.
Right. Right. Or we called it something. They've been doing it. We called it something. And it's interesting. You bring up a good point. I actually could counter argue that almost every communistic country was sabotaged. If you look at what happened in World War II, who was
Yeah,
our greatest ally? It was the Russians.
yeah,
They had a bigger infrastructure in terms of manufacturing and mass producing. I mean, that's where the hammer and the sickle came from. It is
no,
the labor work movement, and they had such a bigger force that we allied with them in World War II. But then again, we made enemies with them right after World War II during the McCarthy eraism time
right,
frame because of the space war. Because after we took Nazi scientists through Operation Paperclip and made them NASA scientists to try to get us into the moon, who was the first nation to put a satellite into space? And it was the
right,
Russians. Who was the
right,
first person to orbit in the space? It was the Russians. Who was the
right.
first person to put an animal in space other than testing purposes? We did a monkey, the
Yep,
Russians did a dog. It was
yep,
always the Russian technology was at its forefront because of the workers. And because of
right,
that, that was a threat to us because of the
right,
American ego and imperialism. And so then we
yep,
started sabotaging them. And so it's just interesting. So then, and then also look at Cuba in terms of uh, tactics. They don't want people that close that are socialists. So 60
right,
miles away, they're going to do anything they can, either assassinate the leader like Fidel almost 700 times, or the illegal blockade, which is
yeah,
anti-humane, and try to oppress them economically. And then now they're trying to do that in Venezuela. Look at Libya, look at any other socialist or communist
yeah,
country. I think you're exactly right, comrade. It's
yeah,
such a threat to the imperialistic ego that they will do
yes,
anything to discredit,
yes.
infiltrate, or to bring it down. And that is yet
Well,
another reason why we
we
should be
keep
pro.
we keep saying in our groups, I don't mean to interrupt, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay.
We keep saying in our groups when we're all talking about this, keep your eye on Brazil.
Mm,
Keep your eye on Brazil, because Lula is very left leaning. He is very left leaning.
yeah.
And he's been talking to Maduro in Venezuela about coming up with a separate currency
Mm.
for Central America.
Oh, like
And
what
that
the
is
euro is to Europe?
and that is not going to sit well with the United States.
No, but you know what
And
it would do is it would help protect the Amazon because there's a lot of
exactly,
U.S. companies that mine the shit out of that forest.
exactly. And Lula's already said that he is going to reduce going to reduce forest or deforestation of the
Mm,
Amazon. because he
Mm.
realizes it's the lungs of the earth.
It sure
But
is.
you keep an eye. And did you see what happened this past week in Florida? The
Mm-mm.
CPAC, they did the CPAC conference. You know, the
Oh, that's where Trump
conservative.
got booed. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, but guess who else spoke there?
Who?
Jair Bolsonaro.
Oh, Bolsonaro's such a fascist. Really?
Yes, he was one of their keynote speakers.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, yeah, he was one of their speakers. So you keep an eye on Brazil.
You know what?
And
Thank you for that. I am going to
yeah,
keep an eye on Brazil. That
yep,
it's so funny how this nation has such a deep rooted history with fascism and nobody knows it. Like you said,
yep,
Bolsonaro talking at
yeah,
CPAC. Look at the Ukrainians. The Ukrainian national anthem has a Hitler salute in it.
yeah,
When they sing it, they literally do a salute and we're giving millions to them. Look
yeah.
at like I said, Operation Paperclip. I mean, it was because
Mm-hmm,
a Nazi scientist, disgustingly enough, to say that's why we were on the moon. Like we have
mm-hmm,
such a relationship with fascism, and I think
mm-hmm,
people are just blind to that.
mm-hmm. Well, they have to publicly support the Ukraine because they've made Russia an enemy for so long
Mm,
that they can't flip the script and now side with Russia.
mm,
And Ukraine provides about 35% of the grain for the entire world.
mm.
So they don't want Russia to be able to get their hands on that.
Of course
So
not.
there's a lot of stuff going on over there, but keep your eye on Brazil and keep your eye on Iran, because
Mm,
all this revolution has been going on in Iran and the United States government isn't saying anything about it. But guess what also just happened this past week?
what is that?
Iran just discovered that they are sitting on the second largest supply of lithium in the world.
Oh, here we go. Here we
So
go.
now, so now, all of a sudden, I bet you United States is going to get humanitarian, and we're going to have to go in and help with the revolution.
Oh, that's right. We have to help them get their freedom.
Right? It's all about freedom. It
All
has
about
nothing to do
freedom.
with that lithium. It's all about
Right.
freedom. Yeah.
Right. Just like
Yeah.
Iraq and Afghanistan, it has nothing to do with poppy seeds and oil. Got to help you get that
Right.
freedom.
Right. Huh. So I guess this has been a long way of saying, if they're willing to do that kind of shit all around the world, imagine what they are going to be willing to do to stay in power.
Exactly. Exactly.
So we need to be careful, and we need to combat the misinformation whenever we can.
100%. 100%. Keep your head on a swivel and
Yep.
educate correctly,
Yes.
politically, empathetically to combat that disinformation. 100%.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
All right, comrades. Well, time is up. Damn, I love these conversations. I love you all. I appreciate you all. And yeah, I think we're done. I'm not too sure there's going to be another group reading of just the appendices, but for those that have questions, historically speaking, and for quotations, and if they need to quote stuff or whatever, or just to find like the actual information where Brother Kwame is alluding to certain things in his book, I would highly recommend the appendices. It's the last pages of his book, and it'll tell you everything. It's literally like a research paper. It'll tell you where things are at, what you could look up, and so forth. On that note, also too, in regards to the Second Rainbow Coalition, Brother Kwame and Comrade Elder High Thurman are doing another book tour, this time on the East Coast part of the United Snakes. And for those that can donate to that cause and share the link, it helps spread this revolutionary gospel, so to speak. And so whatever we could do to help the revolution, we have to, because like Comrade Zombie wisely said, if the state, quote unquote, the man, quote unquote, can do this to other nations and to other movements, imagine what they could do to us. They damn sure aren't going to help fund us. We have to fund ourselves. The
Yes.
revolutionary will fund its own revolution.
Yes. And Comrade Lobo and Rafa, I so appreciate you guys. Guardian Rebellion is so happy to be part of this coalition. We're honored to be part of this coalition, and we look forward to many days of learning more from you guys, and helping with this fight.
Thank you, comrade. And Rafi, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, no, everything was said. By the way, as a history teacher, I enjoy listening to the history lesson. So right on.
Oh my God. I'm fucking doing this.
Most of my lessons are from you, Rafi. I take notes, brother.
Holy
You po- you
shit. I
posted on good notes, by the way. But thank you.
I gotta check. I gotta
appreciate it.
check my audience next time.
Oh, no, y'all are on point. Thank you.
Good. Thank goodness. Did we get an A?
Yeah, A plus.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
goodness.
Okay.
Thank goodness. Well, thank you so much, comrades. I love you both. Stay safe. And I hope to do this again soon.
Likewise, comrades. And on that note, we'll end the recording with an all power to the people.
All power to the people.
Power to the people. Hope.
Oh,